Lily Bennet stepped out of the hired carriage with ink under her nails, and her father's account book pressed flat against her ribs, though no one at Ashford House had asked her to bring either. The iron gates had already closed behind her. Gravel settled. The coachman touched his hat and drove away without looking back, as if leaving a parcel at a tradesman's door. In the reflected light of the entrance lanterns, the kid gloves she had borrowed from her cousin looked soft and proper. Inside them, her fingers still smelled faintly of iron gall and old paper. 2 footmen in dark livery stood at either side of the stone steps, balanced in that practised stillness great houses trained into men and furniture alike. One reached for her case before she offered it. The other looked once at her cloak hem, at the plain stitching, and then at her face with professional emptiness so complete it announced judgment more clearly than open contempt. "Miss Bennet," he said, not asking. "Yes. This way." He did not say welcome. Ashford House swallowed sound. Marble floors held the chill of the morning and returned it through the leather soles of her boots. Portraits in gilded frames followed her with inherited eyes, while she was led down a corridor wide enough for 2 carriages abreast, past polished tables on which no dust had ever been permitted to settle, past a staircase so broad it seemed designed for entrances rather than use. Her own reflection floated in panes of dark glass between sconces. She looked like a line drawn in ink and not yet blotted. At the end of the corridor, outside a morning room panelled in pale walnut, the footman stopped and opened the door with a movement that made no sound. Lady Augusta Ashford sat beside the fire with a tray untouched at her elbow and a stack of correspondence arranged into 3 neat piles by some private law of rank and urgency. She wore pearl grey silk without ornament, not plain, deliberate. Every object in the room declared money that had no need to announce itself, and every inch of Lady Augusta declared authority that had never once been contradicted. Her eyes were pale and exact, and she examined Lily not as one woman might examine another, but as a steward might inspect a ledger for irregularity. The solicitor seated opposite her closed a leather folio as Lily entered. He did not rise. "Miss Bennet has arrived," Lady Augusta said, though Lily was standing in front of her. "Good, we are behind already." Lily lowered her head a fraction. "My lady. You will address me as Lady Augusta in private and Lady Ashford in company." "Yes, Lady Augusta." Lady Augusta extended one hand. "The key." Lily blinked once. "I beg your pardon." "The key to your father's counting room, which you were instructed to bring. Mr. Harrow informs me there are receipts we may require if your family wishes me to continue exercising patience." Lily reached into her reticule and set the brass key in Lady Augusta's palm. It looked small there, almost toy-like. Her father had carried that key in his waistcoat for 22 years. The room it opened still held his inkstone, his spectacles, the unfinished column where his figures had broken off 3 days before. The fever took him. Lady Augusta turned the key once between thumb and forefinger, then passed it to the solicitor without looking at him. "Now we may proceed." Mr. Harrow lifted the folio again. "As stipulated in the transfer instrument, all arrears on the Bennet account are stayed for 6 months, contingent upon Miss Bennet's compliance with household directives and successful completion of assigned duties." Assigned duties. Lily kept her face still. The carriage journey had taken 9 hours. She had crossed 2 county lines with a single valise, and no certainty except this. If she refused, the debt purchased at discount would be called at full value. The Bennet warehouse lease would fail by quarter day. Her brother's apprenticeship premium, still unpaid, would be forfeit. One signature One seizure order and everything her father had built with careful sums and honest weights would become inventory. Lady Augusta folded her hands. You are literate, numerate, and unencumbered by husband or engagement. Those are your useful qualities. Lily heard the phrase as if it had been entered in a register and signed beneath. Useful qualities. The fire clicked once behind the grate. You will be attached to my household in a temporary administrative capacity, Lady Augusta continued. The role concerns event management, correspondence supervision, and vendor discipline. You are not a guest. You are not a companion. You are not to offer opinion unless asked directly. Yes, Lady Augusta. You will remain invisible and you will deliver a flawless marriage. The words landed with the neatness of cut crystal. Lily had expected coercion in the language of money. She had not expected to be instructed in vanishing. Mr. Harrow turned a page. Miss Bennet, for completeness, do you acknowledge the condition of personal conduct appended to Clause 4? Lily looked at the folio. The script was precise, legal, crowded. She already knew what she had signed in the dark parlour at home while her brother pretended not to watch. No travel without leave. No communication with creditors. No public contradiction of household authority. Compliance immediate. I acknowledge it. Do you accept the assignment as directed? She thought of her mother's wedding ring wrapped in linen at the bottom of her trunk, pledged twice, and redeemed once. She thought of her brother Thomas at the cooperage yard, shoulders still not broad enough for the barrels he lifted, trying to look like a man to men who would dismiss him as soon as premium papers were called into question. She thought of the smell of wet rope at the docks, of invoices sorted by candlelight, of her father saying figures were not cruel, but people could be. I accept. Lady Augusta inclined her head as if confirming a shipment had arrived on schedule. Good. Mrs. Finch will show you your workroom and the office where you will keep all planning materials. You will begin this morning. The interview might have ended there, but Lady Augusta's attention shifted briefly to Lily's gloves. Remove those. Lily obeyed. The ink stains at the side of her index finger, at the web between thumb and palm, had resisted pumice and soap. Lady Augusta observed them without expression. A reminder, she said. Whatever ambition commerce gave you, this house will not indulge it. You are here to execute instruction, not to rise. Lily replaced her gloves with careful hands. As you direct. Mrs. Finch appeared in the doorway before the bell was rung, a housekeeper of indeterminate age whose cap sat severe and perfect above a face arranged into loyal neutrality. She took Lily through service passages and narrow stairs hidden behind panelled walls, routes that ran parallel to the grand corridors without touching them. The house had two anatomies, one for display, one for labour. Lily was placed with no ceremony in the second. Her workroom sat above the old still room at the back of the east wing, with a sloped ceiling, one sash window, a small desk, and shelves lined with labelled boxes, ribbons, wax seals, place cards, folded samples of embossed stationery. The room smelled of lavender starch and old wood. On the desk lay a stack of blank ledgers, a brass ruler, and a slate with 3 words written in a firm hand. Guest list revisions. Immediately. Mrs. Finch stood in the doorway while Lily set down her case. Breakfast is at 6 for staff in lower hall. Supper at 8 if there is time. Bell for emergencies only. Do not cross the west gallery during family hours unless summoned. Yes, Mrs. Finch. And Miss Bennet. Mrs. Finch paused, as if deciding whether to spend the effort required for speech beyond instruction. Her ladyship does not favour delay. Lily gave a small nod. Neither do I. The housekeeper left. For a moment, Lily did not sit. She crossed to the window instead. From this angle she could see only the service court, stacked coal, 2 grooms carrying saddles, a line of laundry straining white in the cold sun. Farther beyond, just visible over a clipped yew hedge, lay the church spire that served the estate village. Bells would mark the hours there, whether great houses approved or not. She opened her case and removed her father's account book. The binding was cracked. Between pages she had slipped 3 letters. One from the cooperage master acknowledging Thomas's trial placement, one from the bank demanding settlement, one from Lady Augusta's agent confirming the opportunity extended to Miss Lily Bennet, under terms enclosed. Lily set the letters in a drawer, flattened the ledger on the desk, and sharpened the first of the pencils supplied by Ashford House to a cleaner point than it required. By noon she had identified 4 arithmetic errors in the preliminary catering estimates, and 1 duplicate payment entered under 2 vendor names. No one had asked her to audit old accounts. She corrected them anyway, drafting a clean sheet in precise script and setting the originals beneath with annotations in the margin. Waste became leverage in houses like this. So did silence. She would offer one and keep the other. At 1:30 she carried a sealed note to the east kitchen, requesting confirmation of flour allotments for the wedding breakfast calculations she had not yet been authorised to make. A scullery maid dropped a stack of porcelain saucers as Lily entered, the crash sharp enough to stop motion in 3 rooms at once. The girl froze, then bent at once to gather the shards with shaking hands, while the undercook hissed through her teeth about wages docked and references ruined. No one touched the girl. No one helped. Lily set her note on the table, crouched, and took the largest pieces from the maid's hands before they cut skin. "Cloth first," she said quietly. "Do not grip the edges." The girl looked up, startled into stillness. She could not have been more than 17. Her lower lip trembled once, then steadied. "Thank you, miss." Lily stood, took the stack of folded wiping cloths from a peg, and placed them beside her. "Finish here. I will tell Mrs. Finch the delay was my request." The undercook drew breath to object. Lily met her eyes and did not look away. The undercook looked back to her chopping board and said nothing. In the corridor outside, 2 maidservants passed with baskets of linen, and lowered their voices only after they had gone by. "Merchant's daughter," one murmured. "Useful, though," said the other. "For now." Lily continued walking. The words did not surprise her. Labels were a social currency as stable as gold. Spinster, unsuitable, common, convenient. They could be spent by anyone, and recovered by no one. She delivered her note, returned to the workroom, and drew up a seating draft for 142 guests she had never met, arranging names by title precedence and blood grievance from clues embedded in initials and crossed-out pairings. 3 duchesses could not be placed within speaking distance of one another. A viscount's second son must be kept from card tables after supper. Lady Augusta wanted the county to admire compliance and forget scandal. Lily's task was to engineer that forgetting with pen, wax, and linen. At dusk, Mrs. Finch brought a second slate. Interview with steward, 7 o'clock. West study antechamber. No signature, no explanation. Lily washed, changed the collar of her dress, and pinned her hair again with fingers that had begun to stiffen from writing. On the way to the west wing, she passed through a narrow vestibule lined with ancestral miniatures, and paused when she heard voices from the study beyond, the door not fully latched. Mr. Harrow, the solicitor, spoke first. "The transfer is complete. The Bennet liabilities are now consolidated under your mother's authority." Lady Augusta answered in the same uninflected tone she had used for tea and debt and command. "Excellent. The bride is already chosen. Mr. Julian Ashford requires management, not affection." Lily's hand tightened on the folio she carried until the cardboard edge bent beneath her thumb. She did not move. She did not breathe deeply enough to make sound. A floorboard gave softly behind her. She turned. A man stood at the far end of the vestibule in a plain, dark coat. No livery, no jewellery, no mark of rank, except the way he held stillness as if he had chosen it, rather than inherited it. He was perhaps 30, perhaps a year or two more, with wind-burnished skin and grey eyes so sharply attentive, they seemed to gather details faster than speech could arrange them. He looked at the bent edge of her folio, at her face, then at the unlatched study door, and whatever he concluded he kept to himself. "Miss Bennet," he said, voice measured, low, "I am told you can manage difficult arrangements. I should like to hire you for one." Lily kept her folio steady against her ribs and met the stranger's gaze. "I am already hired, sir." "So I understand." His voice remained even, almost quiet enough to disappear into the panelling. "I am Nathaniel Cole, steward to Mr. Julian Ashford. The assignment I offer concerns the same event, but not the same authority." He spoke her name without condescension, and that alone unsettled her more than rank ever had. Men who served great houses usually wielded borrowed power like a cane. He held his like a sealed letter. The study door opened behind them. Mr. Harrow stepped out first, carrying Lady Augusta's key in his gloved hand. His eyes moved from Lily to Mr. Cole, and back again with brief annoyance at finding conversation where he preferred compliance. "Miss Bennet, the steward will review operational matters," he said. "Do not delay Lady Augusta's timetable." "I do not intend to." Mr. Harrow inclined his head to Mr. Cole and walked away. Mr. Cole gestured toward the antechamber. "Will you sit, Miss Bennet?" Lily entered before he could move the chair for her, and remained standing. The room was narrow and high-ceilinged, with 2 writing tables, a map of estate boundaries pinned beneath glass, and a wall clock whose pendulum marked each second as if it were being tallied against someone's debt. "I was told to attend an interview," she said. "This is the interview." He did not open with pleasantries. He asked how many guests could be served in the lower ballroom without creating a bottleneck at the north doors. He asked how many days London modistes required to complete alterations on 6 gowns if fittings were staggered. He asked which local vintner could supply 400 bottles without stretching casks with river water. She answered each question as she would have answered a supplier at her father's warehouse, directly, with numbers where numbers belonged. When she did not know, she said she did not know, then stated how she would learn. At the end, he lifted one sheet from the table and slid it toward her. It was not a contract, only a list in tight, disciplined script. Chapel dimensions, route times from town, delivery windows, names of tradesmen already late and likely to lie about it. "You keep accurate margins," he said. "I keep accurate accounts." "Good." He folded his hands behind his back. "Begin at dawn with the chapel survey, then inventory linens in the west stores. Then visit the kitchens and confirm fuel and flour against planned attendance. Send all numbers to me by 6 in the evening." Lady Augusta gave me separate directives. "She gave you broad directives. I am giving you usable ones." The sentence should have sounded insolent. It sounded like fact. Lily inclined her head once. "As you wish, Mr. Cole." By the time she reached her small room above the still room, the house had entered its evening rhythm. Bells in distant corridors, doors opening and closing with controlled softness, laughter from the family drawing room that did not travel past the service stair. She lit one candle, copied Mr. Cole's list into her own hand, and set her father's account book beside it, as if placing a weight against drift. At 5, she rose. At 5:30, she had already walked the chapel aisle with a measuring cord, while frost clung white to the stone threshold. Ashford House trained the body as surely as it trained staff. Breakfast in lower hall at 6, tasks by 6:30, ledgers until noon, errands through passages that smelled of starch, coal, and polished brass. Then more ledgers by candlelight when the family withdrew upstairs. Lily learned which floorboard near the pantry complained, which footman answered requests with speed and which with delay, which suppliers padded invoices and which feared being discovered. The injustice was never dramatic. It was systematic. Her chair at meals remained at the side table near the door. Her name appeared nowhere on internal schedules except as initials beside obligations. When Lady Augusta required revisions, she did not summon Lily to sit. She left orders on slates, remove tenant names from staff list, reduce musicians to 6, eliminate village children from churchyard floral procession. The handwriting itself conveyed distance, each loop exact, each stroke unhurried by any need to explain. Lily complied where she must, and where she could, she adjusted in silence. A catering allowance, reclassified to decorative ribbon, became wages restored to kitchen assistants. 2 tenant women marked for dismissal reappeared on pastry prep under neutral column headings. The numbers balanced because Lily made them balance. Servants spoke freely when they believed she did not count as an audience. In the linen corridor, one maid whispered, "Merchant's daughter can write, then." Lady Augusta has found herself a clerk in kid gloves. Another answered, "A useful sort until the wedding passes." Lily continued marking table dimensions on a slate board and asked them, without edge in her tone, whether the ballroom drapes had been aired against candle soot. They stared, then answered at once. At midday on the second day, a scullery maid named Elsie arrived pale and shaking at Lily's workroom door, with a cut wrapped in dishcloth. She had slipped while carrying copper pans and feared docking. Lily cleaned the wound in the still-room basin, tied a clean strip of linen around the hand, and wrote the incident in the kitchen tally as breakage due to faulty stair tread, not clumsiness. It cost Lily nothing except another mark beside her name in Mrs. Finch's private ledger of inconveniences. She paid it anyway. Near dusk, she took the outer path toward the church to confirm pew capacity and candle bracket repairs, carrying a small satchel of wax samples and ceiling twine. The estate village had begun to close shutters against evening chill. On the church steps, she saw the groundsman she had noticed from her window the day before, an older man with one knee that stiffened halfway through each ascent, resting with his cap beside him and his breath tight in his throat. A water pail stood 10 feet away as if 10 feet were a mile. Lily set down her satchel, crossed to the pump, filled the tin cup, and carried it back. "Drink before you stand," she said. He looked at her with surprise that sharpened into gratitude. "You are from the big house." "I am from the accounts room," she answered, and he laughed once despite the strain in his face. From the yew-lined path beyond the church gate, she felt observation before she identified its source. Mr. Cole stood half in shadow in his plain dark coat, hat in hand, watching not her face but the exchange itself, as if noting where weight had been shifted and by whom. He said nothing. Neither did she. She picked up her satchel, nodded to the groundsman, and returned to the house with mud at the hem of her skirt, and numbers still waiting to be totaled. 3 days passed in that pattern, each one tightly measured, each one proving that this household could consume a person by half inches if she allowed it. Lily did not allow it. She slept little, wrote cleanly, corrected discreet theft where she found it, and left no arithmetic error unchallenged. At times she felt the old urge to ask why this wedding required such secrecy, why the groom remained absent, why a steward's instructions carried more force than a mother's public declarations. She set the questions aside. Curiosity had ruined merchants with better prospects than hers. On the fourth evening, Mrs. Finch delivered a sealed note on plain paper. West Study Antechamber. 7 o'clock. Bring master schedule. Lily arrived at the appointed minute with 3 ledgers under her arm and ink on her right glove where the seam had begun to fray. Mr. Cole stood at the map table, sleeves rolled to the forearm, reviewing route timings by lamplight. Without his coat, he looked less like a servant and more like a soldier in temporary truce with furniture. "You are punctual, Miss Bennet," he said. "So are debts, Mr. Cole." For the first time, a brief smile altered his face. Not gentle exactly, but human in a way stillness had concealed. He motioned to the chair opposite him. This time she sat. He took the master schedule, read 2 pages, and tapped 1 line with his fingertip. "You reduced flour waste by 30% and increased kitchen labour allocation without exceeding Lady Augusta's total. I reduced ornamental duplication and paid the women she had intended to dismiss. You did it without triggering a quarrel. I did it without asking." He nodded once, as if confirming a private conclusion reached earlier. Then he drew a folded document from the inner pocket of his coat and placed it on the table between them. "Now you should understand the full assignment." Lily opened it. At the top, in formal script under the Ashford crest, stood a date exactly 4 weeks away. Beneath it, chapel order, breakfast sequence, witness list, and legal language, indicating special license rather than bans. The bride's line was left blank. Her pulse altered, not faster, only harder against the base of her throat. "This is not provisional," she said. "No. You intend a full wedding in 4 weeks while half your principal details are concealed." "Yes." She looked up. "For whom am I planning, Mr. Cole?" "For Mr. Julian Ashford." She held his gaze. "And where is Mr. Ashford?" "In reach." The answer carried deflection, but no mockery. Lily placed the document flat on the table to keep the paper from shaking in her hands. "You asked whether I can manage difficult arrangements," she said. "This is not difficult. It is engineered to fail." "It will fail under vanity," he replied. "It may succeed under discipline." The clock struck once, then again. Somewhere below, a door shut in the servants' wing. He continued in the same measured tone. "I am hiring you directly to oversee Mr. Ashford's wedding operations, independent of social theatrics and independent of Lady Augusta's preference for spectacle over function. You will have authority to challenge invoices, replace non-performing suppliers, and alter service sequencing without prior permission. You will report to me. Payment will be personal, weekly, in addition to the debt stay already granted." Lily listened without speaking. Power offered itself in clauses and contingencies. Power could also be withdrawn by the same hand that offered it. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you choose accuracy when no one is watching. Because you spend your own leverage to protect people who cannot repay you. Because you do not confuse obedience with integrity." No warmth softened the words. That made them harder to dismiss. He slid a second sheet toward her, this one short and stark. Terms, compensation, confidentiality, start immediate. At the bottom, a blank for her signature. "If you decline," he said, "you remain in Lady Augusta's administrative employ, and this document does not leave the room. If you accept, the 4-week schedule stands, and we begin tonight." Lily took up the pen. She thought of Thomas's apprenticeship papers, of the warehouse lease, of her father's unfinished column of figures ending midline. She thought of Lady Augusta saying invisible as if speaking of furniture. She thought, too, of the church steps and a steward who watched where kindness went, not where rank pointed. She signed. Mr. Cole sanded the ink, folded the page, and sealed it with dark wax from a stick he carried himself. "Very well, Miss Bennet," he said. "You are now planning Mr. Ashford's wedding." He handed her the sealed copy, and, after the briefest pause, added, "Do not let anyone tell you you're merely arranging flowers." The words settled between them like a rule entered into a ledger, plain and binding. Lily slid the sealed copy into her folio, rose, and inclined her head in formal acknowledgement. "Mr." Cole stepped aside to clear her path to the door, yet when she reached the threshold he spoke again, not louder, only with an exactness that halted her hand on the latch. "Chapel at first light," he said. "We begin with what cannot be improvised." She turned. "Aisle spacing?" "Aisle spacing, pew stability, and sightlines from the south transept. Bring twine and chalk." "Yes, Mr. Cole." She slept little. Her room above the still room held the scent of dried lavender and lamp smoke, and the mattress gave under her weight with the thin resignation of old stuffing. She lay with her eyes open, counting expenses in silence to quiet the other questions pressing at the edges of thought. A steward who hired privately, a groom never seen, a mother who spoke of marriage as management. At some point the corridor bell marked 2, then 3. Lily rose before the 4 o'clock bell, dressed by candlelight, pinned her cuffs and checked her satchel twice for cord, chalk, spare nibs, and the narrow ledger now reserved for Mr. Cole's directives. When she entered the chapel grounds, frost still silvered the grass, and the stone held the wet chill of night. Mr. Cole was already there, coat buttoned to the throat, hat set aside on the lowest step, one gloved hand resting on the chapel door, as if he had been listening to the building breathe. He did not greet her with surprise, only with a brief nod that recognized punctuality as its own form of trust. Inside, the chapel smelled of wax, old hymnals, and damp oak. Pale morning light struck the leaded windows in narrow bars and made the dust visible in suspension. Lily set down her satchel and began, without waiting for instruction, measuring the centre aisle from chancel rail to entrance with the cord looped tight between her fingers. "Mr." Cole moved through the pews, testing each end with quiet pressure, marking those that shifted under weight. "South side loses 6 inches at the 3rd row," Lily said, crouching to sight along the boards. "If the bride's train is heavy, she will catch." He stepped to her side and looked where she pointed. "Then we remove 2 pews and rebalance." "Lady Augusta will object to reduced seating." "Lady Augusta may object in complete comfort from a stable chair." The answer was dry enough to be almost humour, and for a moment Lily felt the edge of a smile threaten despite herself. She did not permit it to form. She made another chalk mark and moved forward. At the transept crossing, her right glove snagged on a rough splinter where a decorative panel had been patched in haste. The leather tore cleanly across the palm. She drew in breath through her teeth as a thin line of red rose against skin made raw by ink and cold water. Mr. Cole crossed the space in 2 strides. He did not touch her hand. He looked at the exposed nail head protruding from the carved edge, then braced one hand against the panel and worked the iron free with his bare fingers. Steady, unhurried, the tendons in his wrist lifting under skin as the nail gave with a short, metallic cry. He set it on the sill beside them. No one should bleed for decoration. The sentence was practical. The tone was not. Lily wrapped her torn glove around her hand and held his gaze for one suspended beat, too long for etiquette and too brief for confession. His grey eyes were sharp in the morning light, and something in them shifted from assessment to recognition, then closed again, behind composure. "I will note repair required," she said. "I have already noted it." Neither of them moved for a second that felt longer than the chapel aisle. Then Lily bent to retrieve her chalk, and they returned to measurements as if nothing had altered. Yet the space between command and compliance had changed shape, subtle as a seam let out by half an inch. By the third morning of preparations, their meetings had acquired a rhythm that no one announced, and everyone in the service wing began to notice. Lily carried numbers. Mr. Cole converted them into orders that arrived with stamped authority. A florist who had ignored 2 written reminders appeared at the east entrance within the hour of Mr. Cole's single note. A wine merchant who had sent diluted stock replaced an entire shipment at his own cost after one private interview in the West office. Lily watched these corrections enter her books as if by force of arithmetic, but no arithmetic explained why men with family crests on their carriage doors addressed Mr. Cole with the wary deference usually reserved for titled patrons. At noon she crossed the greenhouse court to verify table greenery quantities and found him there ahead of her, sleeves rolled, examining cut stems in a tin bucket while the head gardener stood rigid beside him, with cap twisting in both hands. Moist heat fogged the glass panes overhead. Earth and citrus and wet clay thickened the air. "These were cut yesterday," Mr. Cole said, holding up a wilted branch of myrtle. "They will fail by evening." The gardener swallowed. "My lord." The word slipped out and died in the damp air. Mr. Cole did not look up. "Mr. Larkin, you will cut fresh at dawn and keep them in cool water below stairs. Do not announce shortages to Lady Augusta. Report them to Miss Bennet." Mr. Larkin nodded too quickly. "Yes, sir." Lily set her ledger on the potting bench and ran her finger down the supplier list to hide the sudden tightening in her chest. My lord could be habit, she told herself. Deference had many dialects. Men who served ancient estates sometimes used old forms for anyone who kept the wages flowing. She wrote fresh myrtle, dawn cut, cool cellar storage, and did not ask the question waiting under the line. As she turned to leave, she saw a kitchen boy of perhaps 12, standing uncertainly near the door with a crate of beeswax candles almost as tall as his torso, arms shaking from the weight. 2 senior footmen passed him without pause, discussing plate settings. Lily set down her pen, crossed the flagstones, and lifted half the crate onto her own hip. "Lower Hall Stores?" she asked. The boy nodded, startled. "Walk with me." By the time they reached the service stair, her sleeve smelled of wax and pine-packing straw, and her shoulder burned. She left the crate where it belonged and returned to the greenhouse with damp curls escaping her pins. Mr. Cole had moved to the far bench, reviewing delivery tags, yet she felt his attention register her absence and return as clearly as if he had called her name. "You need not carry freight," he said when she resumed her place. "Neither need children." He regarded her for a moment, then gave one short nod. "Add 2 porters to lower hall rotation. Charge to my account." "Lady Augusta's household account?" "My account." She wrote it exactly as spoken. 3 days later they rode to London in a closed carriage to confirm fittings with the modists Lady Augusta preferred, because their names impressed other women more than their work pleased brides. The city smelled of coal smoke, wet horse and river mud, baked thin by pale sun. Lily sat opposite Mr. Cole with her folio braced against her knees, while wheels struck ruts hard enough to jolt ink across her page. He steadied the inkwell with one hand without interrupting his review of guest transport timings. At Bond Street, Lady Augusta's first modiste bowed to Mr. Cole as if receiving a ranking patron and presented a tray of swatches without once asking his role. Lily watched the exchange in mirrored glass, while an assistant pinned sample lace to muslin forms and whispered catalogue prices to her with overt pity at her plain cuffs. "This Chantilly is reserved," the assistant murmured. "Her ladyship requested exclusivity." Lily measured the width with 2 fingers. "It frays at the edge. We will not use it." The assistant blinked. "Madam?" "We will not use it," Lily repeated, and wrote substitute domestic lace, stronger weave, half cost in her ledger. Across the room, Mr. Cole was speaking quietly with the proprietor over a delivery contract. No raised voice, no argument. Yet when they departed, the proprietor himself carried their revised order to the carriage and promised completion in 9 days. On the ride back, rain began in thin, slanting lines that blurred shop fronts into washed colour. Lily closed her ledger and looked at the damp bead tracing the carriage window seam. "You are obeyed in rooms where stewards are usually ignored," she said. Mr. Cole did not answer at once. He watched the rain, then shifted his gaze to her. "Results are obeyed, Miss Bennet." "That is not always true." "No," he said. "It is merely preferable." He returned to the transport schedule. The conversation ended there, formally intact, but the question she had placed between them remained, uncollected, like an unpaid note tucked beneath a blotter. By the second week of October, the house had entered a sharper tempo. Deliveries multiplied. Lady Augusta began issuing corrections at breakfast and reversals by luncheon. Seating cards were rewritten twice daily as alliances shifted with each arriving letter. Lily moved through these adjustments with the controlled speed of someone balancing porcelain across uneven boards. Mr. Cole met her at fixed points: the chapel porch at dawn, West study at 6, carriage yard every 3rd evening, and each time he had already anticipated the next obstruction. On Tuesday, he intercepted Lady Augusta's instruction to dismiss 2 tenant women from kitchen duty and replaced the order with a signed temporary labour contract routed through estate maintenance, where Lady Augusta rarely looked. On Wednesday, he instructed the butler to move one notoriously cruel viscount 3 seats farther from the bride's side for acoustic reasons, preventing the public slight Lady Augusta had evidently planned as entertainment. On Thursday, he appeared at the print shop in town 10 minutes after Lily discovered an unauthorised increase in invitation count and cancelled the excess run before the bill could be charged to her department. He did not explain how he knew. She stopped pretending not to notice. That evening, in the West Study antechamber, Lily laid out 3 ledgers and a folded map of carriage approaches, while the wall clock ticked towards 7. Mr. Cole entered without escort, removed his gloves, and reviewed her revisions in silence. Candlelight cut his profile into hard lines and left his expression unreadable. "Your rerouting of village suppliers saved £14 and 6 shillings, he said. "It also restored wages to the 2 women Lady Augusta tried to remove." "I saw." Lily capped her ink bottle with more care than necessary. "Do you observe all accounts personally, Mr. Cole?" "When accuracy is contested." She met his gaze. "And when dignity is contested." A pause. The clock marked 2 beats. "Then also," he said. The answer landed with unsettling force because it carried no ornament. Lily looked down at her hands to hide how quickly warmth rose under her skin, an involuntary response she refused to name. She had built her life on numbers because numbers could not flatter, abandon, or pretend ignorance. Yet this man kept seeing the exact places where she spent herself, and, without announcement, restoring the cost where he could. Not charity, not even kindness in the sentimental sense. Recognition, precise and unsparing. Mrs. Finch knocked once and entered with a tray of tea. Her eyes moved from the open ledgers to Lily's uncapped pen, to Mr. Cole, standing too near the map table, and something like calculation flickered. and vanished. "Lady Augusta requests the revised witness list," she said. Lily handed over the sealed packet at once. "Ready, Mrs. Finch." After the housekeeper left, Mr. Cole folded the map and tied it with string. "You should eat. There is no time. There is 20 minutes if you take it now. Your schedule leaves little room for comfort. My schedule leaves room for endurance." The line might have been stern in another voice. In his, it sounded like experience offered in plain wrapping. Lily gathered her folio and rose. "Then I will endure on soup and stale bread, Mr. Cole." He looked at her for a long second, then reached into the drawer of the sideboard and placed an apple beside her ledger. Bright red against dark wood, absurdly simple amid contracts and sealing wax. "Take this first," he said. "Accounts improve when the accountant remains standing." Lily stared at the apple, then at him. "Is this an order?" "It is a recommendation." Very carefully, she took it. "I accept recommendations." When she stepped into the corridor, the candlelight seemed less cold than it had an hour earlier. She bit into the fruit on the service stair, sweet and sharp on her tongue, and continued downward toward the lower hall where another round of revisions waited. Upstairs, somewhere beyond the west gallery she was forbidden to cross during family hours, a door opened and Lady Augusta's voice carried in clipped tones through polished space. Lily did not pause. She had numbers to settle, names to place, wages to protect, and a steward with grey eyes who kept rearranging the boundaries of what obedience could contain. She reached the lower hall with apple juice still sharp on her tongue, and found Mrs. Finch waiting beside the long servants' table, a folded card balanced on her palm as if it were a blade to be passed hilt first. "Blue drawing room, half an hour," the housekeeper said. "Her ladyship is receiving for fittings." "At this hour?" "Society does not consult kitchen clocks, Miss Bennet." Lily set her folio down, wrapped the rest of the apple in a napkin for Elsie, and took the card. The script was Lady Augusta's, precise and impatient. Imported lace to be reviewed in company. Bring accounts and silence. She changed her collar, scrubbed ink from her wrist where her glove had torn, and climbed to the blue drawing room through the side passage that allowed staff to enter unnoticed. The room was already bright with lamps, mirrors, and women arranged like porcelain figurines around the central platform, where bolts of fabric lay unfurled in pale cascades. Lady Augusta presided from a gilt chair near the fire, pearls at her throat, expression composed into that particular boredom she wore when injuring someone. At the edge of the room stood Mrs. Doring, the oldest seamstress from Bond Street, her back bent by decades of pinning and hemming, her silver hair tucked beneath a cap, gone soft at the edges. Her hands trembled only when still. When she worked, they were exact. Lily took her place beside the side table and opened the lace ledger. Lady Augusta did not look at her. "Miss Bennet, confirm delivery count. 6 bolts Chantilly, 4 Brussels, 2 Alençon appliqué, Lady Augusta." "Incorrect," Lady Augusta said. She lifted one length of lace between thumb and forefinger, as if touching spoiled fruit. "1 Alençon is missing. Mrs. Doring insists it was never in her workroom. Yet it was billed to my account. Explain." The women nearest the fire turned, not quickly, but in coordinated increments that made attention feel like pressure against the skin. Mrs. Doring's face had gone grey beneath candlelight. "My lady," the seamstress said, voice thin but controlled, "I cut only what was marked and returned all remnants by inventory." Lady Augusta's gaze remained on the lace in her lap. "You are paid to return what is not yours." A younger woman in plum silk smiled without showing teeth. Another lifted her fan and lowered it, signalling satisfaction at a spectacle she had not expected with tea. Lily scanned the entries again. One bolt signed in, one moved to fitting room 2 days earlier under an initial that was not Mrs. Doring's hand. No receiving signature on return, no notation of transfer to ornament. A gap. A deliberate one or a careless one, but a gap that could not be proved in a crowded room where rank outran evidence. Lady Augusta set the lace down. "Mrs. Doring, you will reimburse full value or forfeit your contract. At your age, I advise reimbursement." The seamstress swallowed. "My lady, I cannot." Lady Augusta nodded once, as if confirming whether. "Then you will be dismissed." Lily closed the ledger and heard the soft click of board against board. She did not look toward the mirrors. She did not look toward the women waiting to see whether the merchant's daughter understood where silence was expected. "The error is mine," she said. Lady Augusta turned her head, slowly. "Yours." "I approved the transfer record without secondary signature. Charge the loss to my accounts office allocation." The plum silk woman stopped smiling. Across the room, Mrs. Doring's fingers tightened around her measuring tape until her knuckles whitened. Lady Augusta examined Lily with mild interest, as if testing a new pen nib. "That allocation does not cover imported Alençon." "Then charge the balance to me personally." A pause opened in the room, almost audible. Someone near the door shifted slipper against parquet. Lady Augusta spoke in a voice pitched for company. "You are ambitious in charity, Miss Bennet. Very well. Replacement by tomorrow noon. If the lace is not restored, your debt stay will be reviewed. Mrs. Doring remains only until I decide otherwise." Lily inclined her head. "As you direct." The conversation moved on at once, because society never allowed one humiliation to interrupt another appointment. Lady Augusta resumed discussion of veil length. The women resumed their measured laughter. Lily wrote replacement required, noon deadline, personal charge, and kept her hand steady through the final line. When the last carriage rolled away and the drawing room was stripped back to its bones of furniture and ash, Mrs. Doring gathered her shears with deliberate care, as if arranging instruments after an operation that had failed. "I did not take it," she said without looking up. "I know." "It will ruin me." Lily closed the ledger. "Not tonight." She returned to her workroom, took her father's account book from the drawer, and opened to the page where she had tucked the envelope addressed to Mr. Penrith, solicitor for Thomas Bennet's apprenticeship surety dispute. £32 wrapped in old linen and sealed with plain wax. Every coin had been counted twice. Every coin had a destination. She broke the seal with her thumbnail, removed the money, and placed the empty linen back between the pages. By the following afternoon, she had arranged a supplier carriage to the village draper at personal rate, reviewed 3 inferior alternatives, and rejected all of them before sunset, because any substitute thin enough to save cost would expose Mrs. Doring again when it tore under needle tension. At 7:30, with kitchen smoke flattening low over the service court, she walked to the estate gate in a plain cloak and carried the wrapped coins in her glove. The draper's shop smelled of camphor, damp wool, and candle grease. Mr. Bellamy, who trusted cash more than names, counted the money under his breath, then counted again. "This is full London price," he said. "It must arrive by 10 tomorrow." "That is express cart." "I know." He looked up over his spectacles. "Shall I invoice Ashford House?" "No." He tapped the stack into a square and wrote receipt paid in full by M.B. on a narrow strip of paper. Lily took it, folded it into her sleeve, and turned for the door. Outside, a carriage stood at the curb with no crest lantern lit. Mr. Cole leaned against the far wheel, speaking quietly with a warehouse porter, hat brim shadowing his face. The porter nodded, took a sealed packet, and disappeared into the lane. Mr. Cole's gaze found Lily as she stepped from the shop. It dropped once, briefly, to the draper's receipt visible between her fingers. "Late for ledgers," he said. "Late for lace." He straightened. "Was there a shortage?" There was an accusation. Against whom? Someone older than cruelty should require. She moved to pass him. He did not block her path, but his voice followed, measured and low. "You are paying this yourself." "It is settled." "Miss Bennet." "It is settled, Mr. Cole." She walked back through the dark lane before he could say more and did not look over her shoulder. Her stomach was hollow with the kind of hunger that comes after spending money, not missing supper. In her room, she copied the payment into her private ledger under a single line. Bellamy, Alanson replacement, £32. Brother's brief delayed. At dawn, before chapel measurements, she carried the replacement lace to the sewing room. Mrs. Doring stood at the cutting table with red-rimmed eyes, and both hands braced on wood as if she had expected dismissal papers instead of thread deliveries. Lily set down the package. "Begin from panel 3. We have 10 hours." The old woman touched the wrapping, then looked at Lily's face as if searching for the condition attached. "How shall I repay you?" "By finishing what you started." Mrs. Doring pressed her lips together and nodded once. No further speech. Needles began to move. By the second day after the fitting soirée, the incident had already been rewritten in hallway whispers as a minor accounting correction, because houses like Ashford absorbed moral cost and relabeled it efficiency. Lily let the revision stand. She had no use for vindication purchased through explanation. Just before luncheon, she entered the sewing room to verify final bead counts and found Mrs. Doring holding a cloth purse in both hands, confusion and relief warring across her lined face. "A boy brought this," the seamstress said. "No name, only that I was to keep my contract advance and buy medicine for my sister besides." She tipped the purse into Lily's palm. Coins slid out in a brief metallic spill. £32. Exactly. Lily looked at the money, then at the folded note tucked beneath it. The hand was disciplined, unslanted, and infuriatingly neutral. Error corrected at source. No debt owed where no fault lies. She refolded the note. Through the window she could see the chapel path, and beyond it, a plain dark coat moving between yews at an unhurried pace, as if its wearer had business only with time and not with gratitude. Doring watched her. "Who sent it?" "I do not know," Lily said, and because the statement was not entirely false, she held the seamstress's gaze while saying it. "Use it." The old woman closed Lily's fingers around the purse and pushed it back. "No, it was given for me. If I keep it with thanks. If you need it, that is your affair and yours alone." Lily hesitated, then nodded, and returned the coins to the seamstress's hands. The room smelled of starch and steam and hot metal from pressing irons. Needles flashed, fabric whispered over wood. She spent the afternoon with vows. The chaplain's draft had arrived from the village rectory with 2 witness names transposed, and a legal phrase duplicated from an older form. Lily corrected both, recopied the entire page to avoid visible amendment, and sanded the ink until the lines lay sharp and dark. At 5, she carried the revised vows in a leather folder toward the west study, taking the narrow corridor behind the portrait gallery to avoid family traffic. Halfway along, she heard voices through a door left not quite latched. Mr. Cole first. His tone had shifted into something formal enough to cut. "I will not be bound by your contract." Lady Augusta answered with that same bored clarity she used for menu revisions and personal ruin. "You will be bound by what secures this house. Miss Bennet is convenient. Convenience is all a Bennet can be." Lily stopped. The folder edge dug into her palm. For one suspended instant, her body moved ahead of thought, jaw locking so hard it hurt behind her ears, pulse striking unevenly at the base of her throat, breath gone shallow as if she had climbed too quickly. She set her left hand flat against her stomach, fingers spread, not in weakness, but in bracing, the way one braces a door in high wind. Inside the room, silence answered Lady Augusta's sentence. Not agreement, not refusal she could hear, just silence. The corridor seemed too bright. Wax polish, old paper, cold stone under thin soles, the distant clatter of pans from the service stair. Each sensation sharpened until it felt separate from her body. Convenient. The word entered like a pin sliding under a nail, small and exact, and impossible to ignore. She stepped back from the door before the floorboard near the hinge could sound, turned, and walked the length of the corridor with measured pace, counting each panel seam as if counting could keep her spine straight. At the gallery corner, she paused beside a marble bust of some long-dead Ashford patriarch and looked down at the vows still held perfectly aligned in her hand. She did not tear them. She did not cry. She adjusted the pages, squared the corners, and continued to the study by the longer route, where she placed the corrected vows on the outer desk for delivery and signed the receipt line in clear script. When she returned to the service stair, Elsie called after her with a question about breakfast place cards. Lily answered without turning, her voice level enough that the girl smiled and ran on. Only when she reached the privacy of her workroom did she close the door, set both hands on the desk, and remain very still until the pulse in her throat settled into a count she could trust. When the pulse at her throat steadied, Lily opened the top drawer of her desk and took out the smallest valise she owned, the brown one with a split handle her brother had repaired with sail thread 3 winters ago. She set it on the chair, unlatched it, and began with method rather than haste. 1-day dress, 1 evening dress, chemise, stockings, brush, her mother's ring wrapped in linen, the cooperage letter, the bank demand, her father's account book. She left the Ashford stationery, the Ashford pencils, the wax sticks stamped with the Ashford crest. She folded the room around herself as if closing a ledger at year's end. On the desk, she arranged every wedding invoice in sequence, each packet tied and labelled in her clean hand. Chapel repairs authorised, linen inventories reconciled, kitchen wages corrected, transport routes revised, lace replacements settled. She placed Mr. Cole's operational list on top, then set beside it the antechamber key Mrs. Finch had issued on her first morning, and the narrow silver whistle used for service emergencies. Nothing owed, nothing concealed. A soft knock came at the door, then Elsie's face appeared in the opening, anxious and young under loose wisps of hair. "Miss Bennet, Mrs. Finch asks whether the breakfast cards are to be moved for the Harbury cousins." Lily did not close the valise. She kept her voice level. "No move. Keep Lady Harbury at table 2, seat 6. Shift Mr. Carrow 1 place left to avoid the pillar." Elsie nodded, memorizing. Her eyes dropped to the packed bag and widened. "Are you going somewhere?" "Yes." "Tonight?" "Yes." The girl swallowed. "Will you come back?" Lily looked at her, at the ink spot on her cuff where she had brushed a wet place card, at the raw skin along one finger from too much lye in wash water. "Do the cards exactly as written, Elsie. Then eat before midnight, whether anyone tells you to or not." Elsie's mouth tightened as if she were holding in 10 questions and 1 plea. She gave a small curtsy and withdrew, closing the door with unusual care. Lily took up the valise, her private ledger, and the envelope containing her final calculations. She did not wear her gloves. Ink on skin felt honest. She crossed the service passage, climbed the narrow stair, and entered the west corridor without waiting for summons. Portrait eyes followed her beneath gilt frames. At the study door she knocked once, and, hearing no invitation, opened it. Lady Augusta sat at the far desk beneath the green-shaded lamp, reading correspondence while Mr. Harrow stood near the mantel with one hand inside his coat. The room held the scent of sealing wax and old paper. Both looked up at the sound of the latch. Lady Augusta spoke first. "You are out of place, Miss Bennet." Lily set the valise down beside the door and crossed to the desk. She placed the antechamber key and emergency whistle on the blotter, then laid down the envelope of finalized accounts. "I have completed and indexed all paid invoices, pending invoices, and signed directives," she said. "Mrs. Finch has instructions for breakfast seating contingencies. Chapel and kitchen schedules are reconciled through Thursday. I resign my post, effective now." Silence settled across the carpet in a hard plane. Mr. Harrow removed his hand from his coat and stared openly. Lady Augusta's expression did not change, but her voice cooled by a degree. "You do not resign from obligations purchased at legal transfer. I resign from your employment. You are not in a position to distinguish the two." Lily met her eyes, pale, exact, incurious. "I am now." Mr. Harrow cleared his throat. "Miss Bennet, if you abandon contracted service, the 6-month stay may be withdrawn. Immediate collection actions would follow. Warehouse seizure is a probable remedy. Your brother's apprenticeship surety will fail," Lily said. "I understand." Lady Augusta folded her letter with precise corners and set it aside. All this over a corridor misunderstanding. Lily held still. "Not a misunderstanding. You have been provided shelter, wages, and social proximity beyond your station. You mistake function for insult because sentiment clouds judgment." Lily's hands were steady. "No, Lady Augusta. Clarity does." Lady Augusta leaned back, bored again, as if this were merely an inconvenient supplier dispute. "You are useful, Miss Bennet. Do not make yourself disposable." Lily lifted her valise. Too late. The two words landed and remained. Mr. Harrow looked toward Lady Augusta as if awaiting instruction to invoke statute. Lady Augusta gave none. After a beat, she reached for a fresh letter and dismissed Lily by returning to her pen. "You have until morning to reconsider." Lily turned for the door. "I do not." She closed it behind her and did not quicken her pace until the corridor bent out of sight. At the service stair, she stopped only long enough to hand Mrs. Finch a folded sheet listing outstanding deliveries and the location of every key ledger. Mrs. Finch read the first line, then looked up sharply. "You cannot walk out tonight." "I can." "Lady Augusta will enforce penalty." "I know." The housekeeper's mouth tightened, not with contempt this time, but with something closer to unwilling respect. She took the sheet. "Then at least leave by the church lane. The lower gatekeeper reports to me, not to the front hall." Lily inclined her head. "Thank you." By the time the west clock struck 9, she had crossed the service court and passed through the lower gate with her valise in one hand and her father's account book under her arm. The air smelled of damp stone and extinguished lamps. Behind her, Ashford House rose in lit windows and disciplined silence, a vessel built to contain everyone inside it except those who chose to step out. The church lane ran pale in moonlight between clipped yews. Gravel shifted beneath her boots. Each step away from the house felt at once like loss and relief, as if a tight band around her ribs had been cut and the skin beneath it was still tender. She had not solved the debt. She had not protected Thomas's premium. She had perhaps condemned them both to harder terms by quarter day. The arithmetic was merciless. So was self-erasure. One ruin could be tallied in pounds, the other Could not. At the church porch, she paused to adjust the valise handle, where the thread repair bit into her palm. Hoofbeats sounded from the lane behind her, then ceased. A rider dismounted, boots striking stone with familiar economy. Lily turned. Mr. Cole stood at the foot of the steps in full dress uniform, dark coat fitted close, silver braid catching low light, Ashford insignia at the collar, and cuffs. No plain steward's coat, no borrowed authority. His posture held the same controlled stillness she knew, but the disguise that had framed it was gone. For a moment, neither spoke. The bells above them were silent. Wind moved once through the yews, and was still. "I hoped to reach you before the crossroads," he said. Lily's grip tightened on the valise. "You found me." "Yes." She looked at the uniform, at the signet ring she had never before seen on his hand, at the horse stamped with the Ashford crest, worked discreetly into the saddle leather. The greenhouse slip, my lord. The merchant's bowing. The personal account. The authority that entered rooms before explanation. Every inconsistency rose and locked into place with almost physical force. His eyes held hers, grey and unwavering. When he spoke again, the words were plain and irrevocable. "I am Julian Ashford. My mother's sealed contract named you as my bride 2 years ago, and I hired you to see whether you would choose this house if you were free." The night did not alter around her, yet every earlier hour did. Lady Augusta buying her father's debt, the transfer clauses, the blank line on the special license, the relentless tests folded into logistics, recognition sharpened into anger, then into something harder to classify, because beneath deception there had also been witness. The nail pulled from the pew, the wages restored, the coin returned where blame had fallen on the wrong hands. Lily set her valise on the stone step between them, creating a measured distance. "You tested me with my family's survival," she said. "Yes. You concealed your name while asking for my trust." "Yes." His answers did not defend him. They made no attempt to soften. That, more than apology would have, kept her listening. "Why?" she asked. "Because every woman presented to me by title wanted Ashford before she knew me," he said. "Because every account my mother prepared reduced marriage to acquisition. Because you were the first person in this house to choose principle when it cost you something immediate and visible." Lily's jaw tightened. "And if I had remained obedient? I would have voided the contract and settled your debt without marriage." The statement arrived without flourish, like legal fact entered in ink. She believed him, and the belief unsettled her more than doubt would have. He took one step up, no closer. "I heard what she said in the corridor. You were never meant to." "I did hear it. I know." A long beat passed. Then his voice shifted, not formal, not yet intimate, simply direct. "You have left the house. That was the only decision I would not make for you." Lily looked past him toward the lane descending into darkness, then back toward the lit bulk of Ashford House beyond the trees. One path led to immediate uncertainty and honest hardship. The other led to constraint transformed, perhaps, but not erased. She touched the edge of her father's account book with her fingertips, grounding herself in worn leather and familiar weight. "If you are Julian Ashford," she said, "you can end my family's debt tonight." "I can." "And you can compel this marriage under the same instruments your mother purchased." "I can," he said. "I will not." He reached into his coat, withdrew a folded document with the Ashford seal broken, and held it out. "Read Clause 7. Lily took it. Moonlight and porch lamp together gave enough to make out the lines. Special license terms. Settlement schedules. And there, amended in a different hand and attested by 2 witnesses. Marriage valid only upon spoken consent before clergy. Debt instruments to be separately reviewable by co-trustee designation pending. She lifted her eyes. Co-trustee. If you agree, he said. If not, sole discharge and release remain. The crux of him stood plain at last. Power he could impose, choosing not to. Concealment he had used now ended, an offer that was no longer a command. Lily folded the document along its existing crease and returned it. "I am not returning as convenience," she said. He held her gaze. "No. I will not be managed. No. I decide in daylight." A faint change touched his mouth, not quite a smile, but relief without triumph. "Then I will wait for daylight." She picked up her valise. "Where?" "At the rectory guest room, if you accept shelter there. Mrs. Penwell has already prepared it. Or at the village inn, if you prefer distance. Your choice." She studied him one breath longer, then stepped past him towards the church door. "Rectory," she said. "Distance enough for one night." Julian Ashford moved aside at once and opened the porch gate instead of closing it. She walked through with her bag in hand, shoulders level, and did not ask permission from anyone. Mrs. Penwell's rectory was smaller than Ashford House by every measure except mercy. The front passage smelled of beeswax and bread, and the guest room she offered Lily held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a square of moonlight on the floorboards. No one asked for explanation. No one asked for proof. Mrs. Penwell took Lily's valise, set a warming pan by the hearth, and said, "Your supper is on the tray. Bolt the door if you wish. Breakfast will wait until you come down." Lily thanked her and closed the door. She did not eat at once. She set the valise on the bed and unpacked in the same order she had used to leave. Day dress, evening dress, chemise, brush, the linen-wrapped ring, the cooperage letter, the bank demand, her father's account book. Last, she laid Clause 7 on the washstand and read it again by candlelight, tracing the amended line with her finger until the words settled from shock into meaning. Spoken consent, separate review, co-trustee designation pending. Legal language had been used against her so often that seeing it bent toward choice felt strange, like hearing her own name in a room where only orders had been expected. A knock came, measured and brief. "Miss Bennet," Julian said through the door, "may I leave documents with Mrs. Penwell for your review tonight?" "You may." A pause. "I will wait in the study until 10 if you require clarifications." "I do not require them tonight." Another pause, then, "Very well." She heard his steps recede down the short corridor. No insistence, no appeal. She broke bread, drank broth, gone half cool, and slept with her father's ledger under her hand. By morning, the parish bells had rung 8 before she descended. Julian stood in the rectory study beside a table covered in papers, weighted by an inkstone. Debt instruments, trust schedules, a letter from Mr. Harrow, and 2 folded notes sealed separately. He wore a plain dark coat again, not uniform, as if rank had no need to perform in rooms that had already seen through disguise. He did not sit until she did. "The first note is to Mr. Penrith," he said. "Your brother's apprenticeship surety has been paid in full with fees. The second is to the bank that called your warehouse loan. Principal and arrears are discharged contingent on no marriage. Unconditional." Lily opened both and read each line. Mr. Penrith's clerk had added a receipt in the margin in hurried script. Funds received. Indenture secured. She set the paper down and kept her hands flat on the table until the tremor that came with relief passed. "You acted before asking my answer," she said. "I corrected what should not have been weaponized," he replied. "Your answer concerns marriage, not ransom." She held his gaze. and my father's counting room key. Julian turned to Mr. Harrow's letter and slid it toward her. Inside lay the small brass key on a ribbon, polished clean, with a note in the solicitor's formal hand confirming return of private business property to Miss Lily Bennet by instruction of Mr. Julian Ashford. This date witnessed. Lily touched the key once. The metal was cool. For the first time since arriving at Ashford House, she let herself breathe without counting. "There are conditions," she said. "Yes. If I return to that house, I return as myself, not as convenience, not as administrative cover." "Yes. The tenant women remain on fair wages under written terms, not goodwill. Kitchen injuries are recorded without automatic docking. Mrs. Doring keeps her contract through season's end. Elsie receives 1 half-day each week for literacy lessons. I will not watch another girl lose her future to someone else's broken saucer." Julian answered without delay. "Drafted already. Review and amend." She blinked at him. "Already." "I noticed your corrections," he said. "I preferred them." The corner of her mouth moved despite restraint. Not a smile. Not yet. She reached for the trust packet. "Co-trustee means signature authority." "It does. On debt portfolios." "Yes." "Then coercive clauses are voided before witnesses at breakfast, not quietly filed. They are prepared for public reading." "And Lady Augusta?" His expression did not harden. It clarified. "She remains my mother. She does not remain sole authority." Lily looked down at the documents, at the clean margins and careful attestations that once would have frightened her because they had always arrived as threats. Today, they arrived as tools. She picked up the pen Mrs. Penwell had left by the inkstone and signed where review acknowledged, where acceptance required, where consent was invited and could still be withheld. At 10:30, in the small chapel where she had measured pews in frost, she stood beside Julian before the rector and 2 witnesses. Mrs. Penwell in dove grey, and Mr. Harrow in formal black with a face like carved stone. The aisle had been rebalanced exactly as she had marked it. 2 pews removed, sightline clear from south transept. The repaired panel where the nail had torn her glove showed a fresh polish line, faint, but visible if one knew where to look. "Miss Bennet," the rector said, voice steady over the hush, "do you enter this marriage freely and by your own consent?" Lily heard in that one formal question every corridor whisper that had reduced her to utility, every slate order that had commanded invisibility, every ledger line that had tried to price obedience. She kept her shoulders level. "I do." Julian's answer followed, low and certain. "I do." The vows were the page she had recopied herself, each corrected phrase intact. Her own hand had made the final text. Her own voice now gave it force. When the rector pronounced them married, no one applauded. The quiet felt truer than spectacle. The breakfast in Ashford House was postponed by 3 hours and moved to the lower ballroom because half the invited county had already arrived expecting drama and was served consequence instead. By the time Lily entered on Julian's arm, the chandeliers were fully lit, the musicians subdued, and every seat card she had once arranged under compulsion now placed by her own final revision. She wore ivory silk borrowed from no one, her mother's ring threaded on a narrow chain at her throat, beneath lace that Mrs. Doring had finished with unshaking hands. Conversation thinned as they crossed the threshold, not silent at once, then silent enough to hear cutlery set down. Lady Augusta stood near the host's table in pearl grey, composed as a winter window. "Julian," she said, each syllable clipped, "you will escort your wife to table 7. Seating has been fixed." Julian did not look away from Lily when he answered, "No, mother." Lady Augusta's eyes moved to Lily. "Miss Bennet, you will not confuse ceremony with position." Lily stepped forward one pace, enough to stand clear of Julian's sleeve, and still within the room's full regard. She had spent weeks being told where not to stand. She chose her ground with care. "Not today, Lady Augusta." 4 words. The room held them. Mr. Harrow rose from his place and, at Julian's nod, broke the seal on a document tube bearing the Ashford crest. He read in the same legal cadence with which he had once outlined penalties in Lady Augusta's morning room. Amendment to trust governance, appointment of Mrs. Lily Ashford, née Bennet, as co-trustee of specified debt holdings, immediate voiding of personal coercion clauses attached to non-family debt transfers, restoration of independent review rights to affected parties named in Schedule C. Her family name sounded different in his mouth now. Not sentimental. Ratified. A murmur moved through the guests, then checked itself when Julian lifted one hand. "Any debt purchased in this county will no longer purchase a person," he said. Short sentence. No raised voice. "That practice ends here." Lady Augusta's chin lifted a fraction. "You are making policy from infatuation." Julian's tone remained even. "I am making policy from correction." Lily felt eyes on her from every direction. Curiosity, calculation, grudging respect, anger from those who preferred power, unexamined. Across the room, Mrs. Finch stood near the sideboard with a tray list in hand. For an instant, the housekeeper met Lily's gaze and gave the smallest inclination of her head, the acknowledgement of one professional to another. In the second row of staff by the door, Elsie stood straight in a clean apron, ink smudge gone from her cuff. Mrs. Dorring, invited under service exception, sat near the musicians with her sister and looked at the lace on Lily's sleeves, as if checking seam tension from habit more than vanity. Lady Augusta spoke once more, flat and cold. "You will regret placing the household in untrained hands." Lily answered before Julian could. "The hands were always trained." No one laughed. No one needed to. Lady Augusta looked from Julian to Lily and found no purchase in either face. Whatever reply she considered, she did not offer. She set down her untouched glass, turned with immaculate control, and crossed the ballroom to the west doors. Footmen opened them at once. She exited to a silence that did not follow her out. Music resumed only after the doors closed. Julian drew out the host's chair at the head of the long table, the one position Lily had been told, by rule and glance and architecture, she would never occupy. He did not press her down into it. He waited. Lily sat. Service began, not hurried, not ceremonial for its own sake, simply orderly. Broth hot, bread fresh, staff rotations fair, no child carrying more than he could lift. Midway through the first course, Mr. Harrow approached with a final leather folio and laid it before her with visible reluctance. "Madam," he said, the title landing like a reluctant signature, "the Bennet account closure, bank release confirmation, and warehouse lien discharge for your records." She opened each page, checked the figures, and nodded once. Filed. The word was small, it altered her life. Later, when most guests had moved to polite clusters and speculation, Lily stepped onto the west gallery she had once been forbidden to cross. Afternoon light angled through tall windows and lit dust motes above the marble. Julian joined her without speaking. For a while they stood side by side, looking down at a ballroom still adjusting to a new arithmetic. "You did not ask me to forgive the test," she said. "No." "Good." He turned to her, grey eyes clear, no disguise left in them. "Will you let me earn what I asked for dishonestly?" She considered him, this man who had concealed and then yielded, commanded and then opened his hand. The answer she gave was measured, like every choice that had kept her upright. "Yes," she said, in daylight. He smiled then, briefly, and it transformed his face from guarded authority to something openly human. By evening, she returned to her workroom above the old still room, no longer a sign there yet, choosing to enter before any renovations began. The shelves of ribbons and seals remained. The desk still bore faint ink marks from her first night. She placed her father's account book in the centre, beside the brass key to the counting room, and the trust folio bearing both their signatures. Then she rang once for Elsie and, when the girl arrived breathless, set a primer and slate on the desk. "Half day each week," Lily said. "We begin now." Outside, Ashford House held both its anatomies still: display and labour, marble and narrow stair. Inside, for the first time, Lily belonged in both.